Twins by Edogawa Ranpo. Tather, I've finally made up my mind to confess to you. My day of is drawing nearer, and I want to make a clean breast of all my sins, for I feel that this is the only way I can obtain a few days of peace before I die. So I beg you to spare me some of your valuable time to hear the story of my wicked life. As you know, I've been sentenced to death for the crime of killing a man and stealing 2 million yen from his safe. I did in fact commit that crime, but no one suspects me of anything more than that. So now that I am destined to face my maker, there is no reason on earth why I should confess to another crime far more diabolical. But my heart is set on confessing all while there is yet time. After I have paid the supreme penalty, my lips will be sealed forever. After you've heard my confession, Father, I beseech you to tell my wife everything, for it is only right that she should know too. The greatest of blackguards often turn out to be good men when death is near at hand. I think my wife would hate me forever if I were to die without confessing to the other crime as well. And there's yet one more reason. I've always had a livid fear of the vengeance of the man I murdered. No, I don't mean the one I killed when I stole the money. That case is already closed, for I have already confessed my guilt. The fact is, I committed another murder before that. And whenever I think of my first victim, I almost go mad with terror. The first man I sent to his grave was my elder brother, but he was no ordinary brother. We were twins, born from our mother's womb almost simultaneously. Although he has long been dead, he haunts me day and night. In my dreams, he treads on my chest with the weight of 1,000 pounds, and then he clutches me by the throat and chokes me. In the daytime, he appears on the wall there and stares at me with ghastly eyes, or shows his face in that window and laughs at me grimly. And the fact that we were twins, identical to each other in looks, in the shapes of our bodies, in everything, made things all the worse. No sooner had I killed him than he began to appear before me every time I looked at myself. When I think about the past, it seems to me that it was my brother's desire for revenge that made me commit the second murder, which led to my ultimate undoing. From the moment I cut off my twin's life, I began to fear all mirrors. In fact, not only mirrors, but everything that reflected. I removed every mirror and all the glassware in my house. But what was the use? All the shops on the streets had show windows, and behind them, more mirrors glittered. The more I tried not to look at them, the more my eyes were attracted to them. And wherever I gazed, his face, his mad, leering face, stared back at me, full of vengeance. It was, of course, my own face. Once in front of a mirror shop, I almost fainted, for there I was set upon not just by one face of the man I had killed, but by thousands of his faces, with a number of eyes that seemed incredible. Although I was greatly dismayed by such illusions, my spirit did not break. I was reassured and emboldened by the firm belief that the scheme which I had concocted in this clever head of mine could never be exposed. And the constant strain on my mind, making it necessary for me to be perpetually on the alert and never to relax, even for a fleeting moment, gave me no time to be afraid. But now that I am a prisoner, my mind is too weak to resist, and his ghost, taking advantage of my monotonous life in prison, has gained complete possession of my senses. Thus, ever since being condemned to the gallows, I have been living in a perpetual nightmare. Although there is no mirror in this jail, he appears in the reflection of my face in the water when I wash or take a bath. Even the surfaces of tableware, glistening hardware, and in fact anything that reflects light gives back to me the sight of his image, now large, now small. Even my shadow cast by the sunlight from that window there scares me. And worst of all, I dread seeing my own body, for it, too, is an exact replica of that of my dead brother, down to the faintest wrinkle. I would rather die than continue to be kept in this agony, a hell on earth. Instead of fearing my execution, I look forward to it, and the sooner it takes place, the better. But at the same time, I feel that I simply cannot die without first telling the truth. I must get his forgiveness before I die. But if not that, I would at least like to drive away the feeling of being haunted. I know of only one way to achieve this. It is to confess my crime. Father, please listen closely to my confession And later, please tell the court as well as my wife. I know it is much to ask of you, but I have only a little longer to live, and it is my sole request. And now I'll tell you about my other crime. First, let me repeat that I was born as one of a pair of twins so strangely identical, so completely the same that it seemed as if we had been cast in the same mold. There was, however, a single distinguishing feature. This was a mole on my thigh, the one sign that made it possible for our parents to tell us apart. If our hairs had been counted, I would not have been surprised had the number been the same. This very singular similarity between us was, I now believe, the seed which gradually took root in my mind, tempting me to kill my other half. When I finally decided to kill my brother, I really had no special reason to be bitter towards him, other than that of a burning jealousy on my part. The fact of the matter was that he inherited an immense fortune as firstborn son and heir, while my share was incomparably smaller. At the same time, the woman whom I had loved became his wife. Her parents had forced her to marry him because of his superiority over me in a fortune and position. Naturally, this was our parents' fault rather than his. If I wanted to hate, I should have become bitter against my deceased parents rather than against my brother. Besides, he was innocent of the knowledge that his wife had once been my heart's desire. But hate him I did, with all my soul. So if I had been capable of thinking rationally, nothing would have happened. But unfortunately, I was born wicked, and I didn't know how to get on in the world. And to make matters worse, I had no definite aim in life, being a confirmed wastrel. I had become the kind of rogue who is satisfied only with living a life of idleness, living from day to day without a thought for tomorrow. Therefore, after losing both my fortune and my love at one stroke, I suppose I became desperate. At any rate, I immediately squandered foolishly the money I received as my share. Consequently, there was nothing for me to do but to appeal to him for financial help, and I used to give him a great deal of trouble. He gradually became annoyed at my repeated calls for help, and one day he told me flatly that he would put a halt to his generosity unless I mended my ways. One afternoon, on my way home from his house after having been refused another loan, a terrible idea suddenly occurred to me. When I first thought of it, I trembled with fear and tried to shake it off. But the idea kept coming back like a persistent melody, and the more I turned it over in my mind, the more I decided it was quite a feasible plot. I gradually came to think that here was the opportunity of a lifetime, that if I carried out my scheme cleverly and resolutely, I could obtain both fortune and love without any danger. For several days, I thought of nothing except my sinister plan. And after considering every possible angle, I finally decided the coast was absolutely clear and I could go ahead. Please believe that my wicked resolution did not grow out of any feelings of animosity. As a born rogue, I only wanted to obtain pleasure at any cost. But in spite of my wicked nature, I was still a coward and would never have made such a resolution had I anticipated the slightest danger. But there was not the faintest chance of failure, or at least so I believed. I quickly began to put my plans into operation. First, as a preliminary step, I visited his house more frequently and studied his and his wife's daily behavior closely. Painstakingly, I tried to observe and to remember every detail of their lives, overlooking nothing. For instance, I even went to the extent of noting the way he wrung his towel after washing. After about a month, when I had completed all my observations, I suddenly announced without any warning that I was all set to go to Korea to find work. At the time, I was still a confirmed bachelor, so my sudden announcement did not arouse any suspicion. On the contrary, my brother rejoiced when he heard the news, although I had a sneaking suspicion that he was jubilant only because he thought he was finally to be rid of me. At any rate, he gave me a considerable sum of money as a farewell gift. One day soon after, it was a day which suited all my plans perfectly, I boarded a Shimonoseki-bound train at Tokyo Station and waved farewell to my brother and his wife. But after only an hour or so, I stole off the train at Yamakita, and after waiting some time, took a train back to Tokyo. Traveling by third class and mingling with the crowd, I was soon back in Tokyo without anyone's knowing. I should explain at this point that while I waited for the Tokyo train at Yamakita Station, I went into the restroom and cut out the mole on my thigh with a razor, the one and only mark which distinguished me from my brother. After this simple operation, My brother and I were carbon copies, so to speak. When I arrived at Tokyo, dawn was just breaking. This too was part of my plan. Without losing any time, I quickly changed into a kimono I had had made for the purpose before starting out. It was of the same Oshima silk which my brother used for everyday wear. Furthermore, I also put on the same kind of underwear, wore the same sash, the same clogs, in fact, everything that he usually wore. Then I went to his house at the right time, carefully figured out to a split second. Taking extra care that nobody should see me, I climbed over the back fence and stole into his spacious garden. It was still very early in the morning and dark, so no one noticed me as I crept up to the side of the well in one corner of the garden. This old abandoned well was one of the most important factors which prompted me to commit the crime. It had run dry long ago and had not been used since. I remembered my brothers having said at one time that it was dangerous to have such a trap in the garden and that he intended to fill it up soon. A mound of earth was now piled up high beside the well, no doubt having been brought there by the gardeners, to whom I had suggested only a few days ago that they fill up the hole on this very day. I crouched down, hiding myself in the shrubbery, and waited calmly, expecting at any moment to hear my brother's footsteps, for it was his custom to take a stroll in the garden every morning after his toilet. As I waited, I felt cold beads of sweat run down along my arms from my armpits. How long I waited I do not recall, except that time seemed to stand completely still. Perhaps it was about 3 hours later, hours which seemed more like years, when I at last heard the clatter of his clogs. My first impulse was to run away, to escape from the horror of my own devilish scheme, but somehow my legs seemed to have grown roots in the ground and I couldn't move. Before I knew it, my long-awaited victim had arrived just in front of the shrubbery in which I was concealed, and I realized with a start that my time had come. With amazing agility, I suddenly sprang out and wound the rope which I had prepared around my brother's neck. And then I slowly proceeded to strangle him. Desperately he struggled, twisting and squirming, and frequently he tried to look back to see who his assailant was. I in turn tried with all my might to keep him from doing so, but his discolored face, as though it was being worked by a very strong spring, slowly turned back toward me, inch by inch. Finally, his red, swollen face, it was just the same as mine, turned back and came into range, and from the corners of his mad, staring eyes, he beheld my face. As soon as he recognized me, he shuddered, as if from shock. Never will I be able to forget his face at that moment. It was a death mask, a horrible countenance which cried out for vengeance. Soon, however, he ceased to struggle. Then he turned limp and fell to the ground. By this time I was exhausted, and after I dropped him, I rubbed my hands vigorously because they were rigid and paralyzed from the strain. Then, my knees still knocking together, I rolled his dead body like a log to the well opening and pushed it in head first. Next, I picked up a board and used it to scoop enough of the loose dirt into the well to cover the corpse. Had there been a witness to the scene, he would certainly have thought it nothing but a bad nightmare. Just imagine. He would have seen one man strangling another wearing the same clothes, possessing the same figure, and even the same face. Well, thus it was that I committed the great crime of killing my own brother. It was the same story as that of Cain and his brother Abel. Only in our case the brothers looked exactly alike, for did we not share identical bodies? Does it surprise you that anyone could perpetrate such a cold-blooded crime? I do not wonder. But as for me, the very reason for my wanting to kill him was that we were two persons in one, and how I hated my other half. I wonder whether you've ever had such a feeling of uncontrollable hatred, far more severe than that which you could feel against any person not closely related to you. And in my particular case, it was still more so because we were twins and I was insane with jealousy. To continue with my story, after I covered the body with enough earth, I still lingered on, absorbed in contemplation. After about half an hour, I suddenly noticed with alarm that the gardeners were coming, led by a maid, and I again concealed myself. Immediately the devil in me again whispered that this was the cue for my second entrance on the stage, for a brutally deceptive play, a performance starring a maniac. Impersonating my brother, I calmly came out of hiding and turned my face toward them a little nervously. "Well, well," I said as naturally as possible, "so you've come early. I've helped you with your work a little. Ha ha. I hope you can fill up the well by nightfall. Well, you'd better get started." With these words, I slowly walked away with the familiar gait of my dead brother and went into the house. After that, everything went like clockwork. I kept to the study all that day, my nose buried in my brother's diary and account books. For although I had studied everything else before announcing that I was going to Korea, I had been unable to get at these two items. In the evening, I sat at the dining table with my wife, the woman who had been my brother's wife and who now was mine, chatting pleasantly in the same way my brother had done, conscious that she was utterly unaware of the horrible truth. Late that night, I even ventured into her bedroom, but once there, I felt a little shaky, for I hadn't the faintest notion about his habits in this private chamber. However, still bubbling over with self-confidence, it was my firm belief that even if she did find out the truth, she would not spurn me, her old sweetheart. I opened the sliding door of her boudoir composedly and soon switched off the lights. Once I had gone so far as to commit adultery as well as murder, my mind was now at rest, and I continued to live happily for a year. With plenty of money to spend, and with the woman I had once loved at my beck and call, my life seemed one of perpetual bliss. But there was one hitch: my conscience. Night after night it tormented me, while his apparition haunted my dreams. In fact, this period of a year was the longest I had ever experienced. Gradually, like the complete rogue that I was, I began to grow weary of my humdrum life. Again, I fell into my old bad habits. My brother's large fortune soon began to dwindle, as I spent money like water, and I discovered one day that instead of being a rich man, I was up to my neck in debt. Furthermore, I no longer had anyone to turn to. What a curse! This was what spurred me on to commit the second crime. If you reflect carefully, you'll see that this was but a natural sequence to my first murder. When I first decided to kill my brother, I already had this second plot in the making. I had decided that if I could manage to become my elder brother in every minute detail, nothing would stand in the way of my committing other crimes. You see, even if the younger brother, about whom nothing whatever had been heard after his departure for Korea, committed a murder or burglary or any other crime, the elder brother would always be free from blame or suspicion. Also, there was another peculiar circumstance in this singular chain of events. After my first crime, I chanced upon a surprising discovery, one which showed me how easy it would be to commit my next crime without any danger of detection. One day I was making an entry for the day in his diary, copying his handwriting carefully. This was really a nuisance, but it had to be done, for it had been another of his daily habits. After writing a few lines, I compared the part written by me with a part written by him, and I was startled to find a fingerprint on one corner of the page. Evidently, it was my brother's. For a moment, the shock of the discovery stunned me, for I had overlooked this most important detail. Carelessly, I had thought all along that the mole on my thigh was the only difference between my brother and me, and now I was stumped. What a fool I had been. Why, even a grade school student knows that every person in the world has his own type of fingerprints, and I, of all people, should have known that even twins never have identical fingerprints. Now at the sight of his fingerprint in the diary, I was overcome by the fear that it might betray me. Secretly, I bought a magnifying glass and studied the smudge, which turned out to be a thumbprint. I stamped my own thumbprint on a piece of paper and compared the two. Upon casual observation, the two prints seemed very similar, but then I examined them closely, line by line, coil by coil, and detected many differences. I next secretly took the fingerprints of my wife and the maids for caution's sake, but they were so different that I didn't even need to compare them with the one in the diary. Assuredly, the one in the book was my brother's thumbprint. Since we were twins, it was natural that it resembled my own. Thinking it would be a serious matter if any other fingerprints of this sort existed, I made an exhaustive search for more. I examined all the books, page by page, looked in the dust in every corner of the shelves, in the closets, the wardrobe, in fact, in every conceivable place where his fingerprints might have been left. But I could find no others. This relieved me somewhat, but I was taking no chances. Quickly, I tore the page out of the diary and was about to throw it into the charcoal brazier, thinking that if this single piece of evidence was destroyed, I would have nothing further to worry about. But then a bright idea suddenly struck me. It seemed to come like an inspiration, not from any angel, but from the devil himself. Wouldn't it be very handy, I told myself, if I could make a cast of the thumbprint? Why, I could plant it on the scene of my next crime, and the ones after that. No one could remember the fingerprints of my actual self, so no one could tell whose they were. And the very fact that my own fingerprints would not match those of my brothers would establish my innocence. As for the police, they would have to search for the person who bore the fingerprints, not knowing that he was buried a good 30 feet under the ground. This wonderful idea raised me to a seventh heaven of delight. Why, I would be able to play the fantastic role of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in reality and never be caught. Putting my wicked plot into operation, I soon stole a large sum of money from the house of a friend and purposely left my brother's thumbprint. This was easy, for I once had some experience as a photo engraver, and of course I had made a block. After this, whenever I was short of money for my merrymaking, I resorted to this means, and was never once suspected or apprehended. Intoxicated by my success, I continued to steal right and left. And as the law never seemed to catch up with me, I finally went to the extent of committing another murder. Of this last crime of mine, you must have read the records, so I'll not go into too much detail. Suffice it to say that I learned of a large sum of money in the possession of another friend, 2 million yen to be exact, reposing in his safe. When I further learned that the money was kept secretly as campaign funds for a political campaign, the setup seemed just about perfect. After studying every detail, I stole into his house one night as my natural self, the younger brother. Creeping into the room where the money was kept, I opened the door of the safe with gloved hands and took out the bundles of banknotes. I knew the combination because he had once opened the safe in my presence, trusting me because that is to say, my dead brother, was an old acquaintance. Suddenly, the lights I had extinguished were turned on. Startled, I turned around and found the owner of the safe confronting me. Desperately, I snatched a knife out of my pocket and stabbed him in the chest. Groaning, he sank to the floor and in a few moments was dead. I strained my ears, but fortunately, no one had been aroused by the sound of the brief struggle. After recovering my breath, I took out the engraved thumbprint of my brother and dipped it in the blood that had been spilt on the floor. I then stamped it on the wall nearby, and after making sure that there was no other evidence, I ran away at top speed, taking every precaution against leaving any footprints. On the following day, a detective paid me a visit, but this did not disturb me at all, for I was still confident that the trick would work again. He told me apologetically and politely that he had visited every person who must have known of the large sum of money in the safe of the victim. Furthermore, he said that a thumbprint had been left on the spot, that it had not matched that of any ex-convict, and that he was sorry to trouble me, but he wanted me to let him have my thumbprint, as I had also known of the money in the safe. Merely a matter of routine, he assured me. Laughing at him inwardly, I asked many questions, as if to show that I grieved the loss of my friend, and then let him take my thumbprint. After the detective left, I immediately forgot all about him and hurried to my favorite merrymaking hangout with a well-filled purse. 2 or 3 days later, the same detective paid me another visit. I found out later that he was a crack sleuth of the Metropolitan Police Board. When I casually walked into the drawing room, the detective looked at me with a peculiar smile. The next moment my head was swimming in a whirlpool of despair. Calmly, the man had placed a sheet of paper on the table, and when I looked, I saw what it was: a warrant for my arrest. While I gazed at the paper, almost hypnotized with terror, he approached me quickly and handcuffed me. The next moment I noticed that a burly policeman had been waiting outside the door. Shortly after, I was behind iron bars. However, I was naive enough to believe that I still had a chance. I was confident that they could never prove that I had committed the murder. But what a surprise awaited me. When I appeared before the procurator and heard his summation of the charges against me, I was pinned to the floor in open-mouthed amazement. I, who had always been so clever, had made such an absurd mistake that I was almost tempted to laugh out in self-mockery. Surely this must have been my brother's curse. How had I erred? Really, it was too foolish for words. The thumbprint which I had believed to have been my brother's was actually mine. The mark I had found in the diary was not a direct fingerprint, but had been pressed there after I had once wiped my ink-stained fingers off. So it was the ink which remained in the shallow grooves between the ridges, rather than the ridges themselves which had made the mark, producing a print like the negative of a photograph. It had been such a careless mistake that I could hardly believe it was true. The procurator voluntarily told me of a case that had happened in 1913. He said that the wife of a merchant in Fukuoka was wantonly killed one day and that the police arrested a suspect. The fingerprint left on the scene of the crime and that of the suspect didn't seem to tally, although they looked very much alike. After being put off the scent completely, the police asked a specialist to study chip prints scientifically, and at length they were proved to be identical. The case had been the same as mine. The fingerprint on the spot had been the negative, but the expert, after close investigation, had reversed one of the photographs of the two fingerprints, changing the black to white, and the photographs then matched perfectly, thus proving the case. Now I have told you everything. I beg you, Father, to make the facts known, especially to my wife, for only then will I be able to climb the 13 steps to the scaffold on steady feet.